Hello, live webinar. This is Jono Whitcamper, and I work with the Global Governance Philanthropy Network and Nexus, and I'm a co-convener of the UN 75 Global Governance Forum. And this session is about conservation of the Amazon. And we have a focus on financing and sustainability. We have a group of illustrious panelists from many different institutions and organizations and movements and governments here with us. It's going to be a dynamic time. Just a couple of background pieces of information on the Amazon. It's big, maybe the size of the continental United States, and it's on fire with huge amounts of deforestation across all regions of the Amazon rainforest. We will be talking about Brazil, but also other countries of the 9 that make up the Amazon rainforest. Our goal is to advance forest-friendly economic development. We believe that the forest should be worth more alive and standing than cut and burned. And the financial products that reflect such wisdom just don't exist yet, or they're not at scale yet. And our goal is to get into that challenge and figure out why and scale it up. And so we're creating the Amazon Investor Coalition to do that. So point your web browsers to www.amazoninvestor.org, just announced two days ago as part of the launch of this movement and this United Nations conference. And let's begin with our panelists. We'd like to begin with Walter Vergara of Initiative 20 by 20. Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonah. And thanks to you, and good morning to everybody. Are you going to show the slides, or should I share my screen?
Please share your screen.
Okay, so give me 1 second. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you, John, again, and good morning to everybody. My name is Walter Vergara. I work at WRI. WRI is the Secretariat of Initiative 20 by 20. And in the next 4 minutes, I'm going to give you a quick glance at the initiative and its work in the Amazon Basin. So the initiative was launched in 2014 at COP20 in Lima. It now includes 17 countries. The 17 countries go from Mexico to Chile. I hope you're seeing that map. It's an effort led by these countries to change the dynamics of land degradation in Latin America. It also includes 23 financial partners that have earmarked $2.5 billion for restoration purposes in the region. And it also includes 80 technical partners. In the Amazon Basin, members of the initiative include Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil. In Brazil, we have very active participation at the state level from Rondônia, Mato Grosso, and other states in the southern part of the country. In this slide, I'm sharing the support platform of the initiative. There are 80 technical partners. These partners provide expertise, knowledge, experience on issues linked to deforestation, avoided deforestation, restoration, landscape management for Initiative 2020. And on the right side panel, you have a list of the financial partners. The financial partners today include 23 funds. Most of them are impact funds. There are a few philanthropic funds as well. And we have an association with the multilateral banks. And the JEF is also an active member of the initiative. The initiative has 3 main activities. It's a collaborative effort, 17 countries leading the initiative, 80 technical partners, and 23 financial partners from the private sector. And there are 3 activities: a political dialogue, which is conducted at a very high level with the ministries of agriculture and environment, with the principals themselves, discussing policies and incentives, restoration and reforestation plans. And the initiative has been very active in supporting the enactment of some of these plans in several of these countries. And more relevant and for today's discussion, and also most recent, the inclusion of restoration in NDCs, the national determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. The second activity, analytical efforts. We have 7 studies already completed or in the process of being published. That includes the commonality is a diagnosis of barriers and difficulties and how to address them to face the problem imposed by degradation and deforestation in these nations, and in this particular case, in the Amazon basin. And the third activity is the promotion of private investment. There are a number of tools that we are using for that. And this diagram shows a summary of those tools. There is a risk capital pool of $2.5 billion for the initiative, a partial risk guarantee that we have negotiated with Jeff through the participation of IDB, investment roundtables, an investment accelerator, a working capital pool of money, and also the participation of debt financing. I'll stop here because I've run out of time, but later on I will give you more details about the investment part. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you so much, Walter. So here we jump in. We see that there's an enormous amount of money, attention, political will going into this challenge of the Amazon and this march of deforestation. My recommendation to everybody on this call is to learn as much as you can. Rather than just spending money willy-nilly, figure out where to best place it. And so here are some links to get started. There are many, many, many people working on this challenge. Just to go over those links. First is a generalist article that's on Manga Bay, one of the best sites to learn about tropical forests around the world. The second link there is for many of those who are new to the area. It's a rather comprehensive article. It's something that I wrote. It lists many books and films, but also many of the institutions listed on this call. The third link there is a place for everyone on this call and panelists to place notes. If you represent an NGO or a fund, or you're fundraising for your forest-friendly startup, post information there, tinyurl/AIC notes. And then finally, on the Amazon Investor Coalition site, there are a list of books and films as well that you can review. Next on our list is Renata, or in English, Renata Piazzon from Instituto Arapio. And just let me give one piece of context. Just like the challenge of gun control in the United States, the issue of work on the Amazon is really polarized in Brazil and in other Amazon countries. And in order to make progress on it, you need to facilitate collaboration. You need to get together unlikely allies. You need to create bridges across these lines that divide us. And one of the best philanthropies in Brazil at doing this is Instituto Arapio. Renata, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonah. So I'm Renata, I'm the head of the climate program of Arapiaú. Arapiaú is a family philanthropic foundation that has been supporting projects, initiatives, and networks that promote the sustainable development of the country. As Jonah said, we have in our DNA the facilitation of networks in search of consent, of building a common ground around complex problems. So we strongly value multi-stakeholder systems that are based on transforming what we call confrontations into conflicts. We believe that conflicts move us forward while confrontation paralyzes. So that is the same as the utopia of consensus versus the realism of consent, which is what we believe. An example of searching this realism of consent is the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Forests, and Agriculture that I shared with you all the link in the chat. And we have been supporting this coalition since 2015. Another example is the Possible Amazon initiative that we launched 1 year ago at UNGA, and this new initiative that we are currently leading called the Amazon Consultation. So the Possible Amazon was launched at the UN as a call for the private sector to discuss concrete proposals for the sustainable development of the region on the road to COP25 at that time. And at that moment, we gathered Brazilian business leaders announcing that in order to ensure the needed protection of the Amazon, it was necessary to immediately stop illegal activities, to develop a plan for the sustainable development of the region, and to ensure the traceability of livestock, agriculture, mining, and forest source products. So basically the three pillars were legality, economy, and traceability. And after 1 year, the initiative is launching at UNGA again next week, the 10 principles, business principles for the sustainable development of the region, which also shows business cases that contributes for Brazil to emerge as the leader in a low carbon economy and a high biodiversity economy. To end, I just want to highlight the Amazon Consultation. It's a recent initiative that we are supporting that was formed from the need to expand the discussion on the sustainable development of the Amazon region and to also connect the various initiatives to promote synergies. The first step of these initiatives is to build a broad knowledge base about the region. The idea is to generate systematized knowledge in order to have a more complete and clear vision of the development models for what we call the 4 Amazons. So the region under threat of deforestation, the preserved area, the area already deforested, and the urban areas, always embracing the diversity and the complexity of the region. We really believe that through this constructive dialogue and building bridges between the private sector, governments, academia, philanthropy, civil society, local communities, we can build future development paths for the region that can reconcile environmental power with agricultural power. This is a huge challenge, but we believe that the opportunity is greater. So thank you so much, Jonah, for this invitation, and please feel free to reach me at any time. And I believe I put all the relevant links in the chat. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hinata. So there's some people finding common ground, and there's some progress moving forward across the Amazon region. The idea of forest-friendly economic development has a very, very bright future. But you can't have smart economic development without the rule of law. You can't have smart economic development without the indigenous people and their territories being respected. So the rule of law is one of the major pillars of the Amazon Investor Coalition. And so I've just posted a link with some information about some of our ideas. And I'd like to invite Tusha, Felipe Cruz Tusha, to talk about the articulation of the indigenous people of Brazil, a little bit about the indigenous people of the Amazon, and also their landmark Supreme Court case in the Supreme Court of Brazil to require the government to defend those indigenous communities from COVID-19. Tusha, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jonah. Well, it's a great responsibility to speak here in this session on behalf of the Articulation of Indigenous People of Brazil, APIB, which represents indigenous associations and collectives across the country. The coronavirus pandemic has only aggravated the chaotic context of indigenous realities in Brazil, accelerating land invasions and the dismantling of indigenous rights. In a context of growing anti-indigenous sentiment that we have faced in recent years, COVID-19 has put a new sense of urgency in APIB to face the expansion of this new threat to indigenous people in Amazonia and elsewhere in the country. Historical problems, such as the constant challenge to keep the integrity of indigenous territories, always threatened by illegal activities such as mining and logging, increases when state officials use the pandemic as a smokescreen to attack environmental legislation and intentionally leave indigenous peoples to fend for themselves. How can we reverse this hostile political context provoked by the total ineptitude and neglect of the government to fulfill its constitutional duties? Last July, the Brazilian Congress passed a bill to draw up an emergency plan to fight COVID-19 in indigenous and other traditional communities. However, the current president, in sanctioning the bill, vetoed, he did a veto several clauses that charged the current government with the obligation, among other things, to supply this community with drinking water. In response, APIB submitted petition number 709 to the Federal Supreme Court. For the first time in history, an indigenous lawyer, Dr. Luiz Eloy Terena, represented an indigenous organization in the country's highest court. We are talking about a tragic moment when many men, women, and children are dying, and people losing the elderly, guardians of their traditional knowledge. Invasions of indigenous land are worse than ever, as in the Yanomami indigenous land, where an estimated of 20,000 miners are wreaking havoc in the region. That is also the case of the Caripuna, Kayapó, Munduruku, and other indigenous land in Amazonia. Against this scenario, APIB fought to be recognized as an entity capable of producing this petition based on indigenous organizing principles to represent ourselves and our interests to the Brazilian state. In August, the Federal Supreme Court approved the petition unanimously and charged the government to draw up a plan to tackle the COVID-19 crisis among indigenous people. The term genocide has been used to describe certain ways in which the government has dealt with the fast spread of COVID-19 through indigenous territories. Omission, slowness, and attempts to minimize the disease effects added to the lack of clear and specific policies to remove invaders as potential sources of COVID-19 infection. All of this make up the ideal scenario of a genocide foretold. Reflecting the institutional racism that permeates Brazilian society, the subsystem of special health, SESI, the state healthcare system for indigenous people, has been accused of denying assistance to indigenous people whose lands are not fully recognized by the state. This is the reality of countless indigenous people who seek territorial recognition and sometimes live precariously in small camps on the margins of highways, while the state systematically fails to demarcate their lands for years and decades. This is something that that's what I prepared to share with you now, and I'm looking forward to move on to the debate and share if anything comes up. Thank you.
Tusha, thank you so much. There's so much evidence that the most conserved forests around the world are those that are inhabited by indigenous people. Your work could not be more urgent. When analyzing the problems of rule of law in Brazil and elsewhere, and figuring out strategic places to make investments, I came across the campaign Seja Legal com a Amazônia. That means in Portuguese, be cool with the Amazon, or be legal with the Amazon. It's fascinating. It's a non-adversarial campaign that has endorsements from people both from the environmental sector and the pro-business agricultural sector. It is a representation of common ground, and that's why I've chosen to feature it on this call. And Alexandre Mansour is going to share more about it with us. You're on mute.
Thank you, Jonah. Hi, everyone. I'm going to show to you the campaign. My name is Alexandre Mansour. I'm the director of Mundo Queremos, which is the agency that created and is running the campaign. Well, everybody knows the Amazon. Everybody knows the destruction. What people feel know is that the deforestation is the side effect of widespread land grabbing in the region. 90% of deforestation happens on public lands. And that means indigenous lands, conservation units, and also undesignated areas. There are hundreds of gangs specialized in land grabbing. They invade public lands, cut the forest, try to get amnesty, and sell the stolen land. The destruction continues because Brazilians do not know that they are being robbed, and because the authorities have few incentives to suppress this crime. Then we created Seja Legal com Amazônia. Our goal is to raise awareness among Brazilians and pressure the authorities to act. We asked for support the Amazon Task Force by National Prosecution Agency, stop deforestation in public areas, create a task force to promote the destination of undesignated lands, create a task force of federal justice to punish the criminals, and maintain the current conservation units. Our strategy is to operate with consensus, joining left and right. We are joining agribusiness, industry, and environmentalists, and we are not adversarial. We are supporting the actions against crime. Our motto is that this is good for people, this is good for business, and good for law enforcement. We launched the campaign a year ago with an action simulating a land grabbing operation in the middle of São Paulo. And after that, we did several actions, including international meetings and meetings in partnership with Brazilian authorities. Our last victory was the extension of Amazonia Task Force by the National Prosecution Agency. Our next steps are build a dedicated team, turn our website into a hub about land grabbing, create the first index of deforestation in public lands, boost our posts, make a series of short videos about subject, promote more meetings and webinars, and produce a podcast series as well. Here is our contacts. I'm going to post them at the chat area. This is our supporters. They include organization of agribusiness sector and environmental organization as well, and the Coalizão Clima Brasil e Agricultura. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandre. So we visited the task, the challenge of rule of law. And now we're going to visit the challenge of green economy development. How can we scale economic development across the region in a way that is forest friendly? I'm going to post a little bit about the strategy from of the larger Amazon Investor Coalition. And I'd like to invite Marina Campos from Connexus. What's your strategy, Marina?
Thank you very much, Jonah, for inviting myself and us to be in the seminar today. It's nice to be among several colleagues. And I'm currently the Executive Director of Connexus, which is the Institute of Sustainable Connections, based here in the United States, which is its American arm, but the Institute also has its local office in Brazil, and a fund that I will discuss later on. Prior to joining Connexus, I was also the program officer for the Andes and Amazon Initiative within the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. What we believe in Connexus is that there is a lot of opportunities we can foster in the Amazon. And what we're really focusing is how can we boost an ecosystem of community-based social environmental enterprises that really help to create an inclusive forest-based economy that helps to create the forests. Our major beneficiaries are cooperatives, associations, as well as small businesses. Our strategy is a three-pronged strategy, and we focus on solutions for the three major bottlenecks that these organizations face when they are in the Amazon or when they are all over Brazil. So first is really improving the business plans that these organizations have. A lot of them don't have balance sheets and they were not really necessarily created or have roots in terms of being a commercial entity. The second one is looking at the access to markets and how can we build new commercial arrangements and build new relationships with companies and with the other buyers. And the third one is actually how do we create a portfolio of adequate finance for this particular public so we can unlock other benefits. So Connexus in itself is a network. As I was saying, we have the institute based in Brazil, we have the institute based here in the United States, and more recently, we have the Connexus Fund, which it's spinned off to become a private company in Brazil. We have about 20, this is actually out of date, we have 30 social entrepreneurs working with us and offices in 7 places. Our first 2 years of creation, what we tried to do is to test and prototype somewhat what I thought were some solutions. And we started by seeing who are these organizations, who are community-based enterprises in Brazil, how many they are, how big they are, what is their revenue. So we started with a very large mapping of these organizations. We came up with more than 1,000 in Brazil, and from which 400 are located in the Amazon. I'm gonna just highlight some of the activities we did. We were able to, when we went to map the demand side, we found out that there are a lot of organizations and private companies that are very interested in purposely buying products that have social and environmental impact, which was a big surprise for us, the amount of organizations that are looking for this. And we also have built and improved the business models and links with markets with 60 organizations, and we promoted 25 new arrangements. And we did this in 2 years. But the question that I think everyone who has worked with community-based enterprises in Brazil or other places have is actually, how do you bring this to scale? Because how do you make this not be about that particular business in one river with that community, but how can you build actually this at the system level? So one of the solutions we found was, in terms of the fund that we created, the 3 financial mechanisms that proved to be very effective. One was creating direct loans to community-based enterprises that were more agile and require less bureaucracy than banks. So in that way, they could get the necessary funds for either working capital or assessing or recovery credit or anything that they needed in order to assess public funds. In Brazil, we have currently a credit line called PRONAF, which is the National Program for Family Farmers, which is about $5 billion a year. And unfortunately, a very small percentage, about 1% of these funds are actually assessed by this public that I'm talking about with sustainable activities. So the idea is, how can we unlock this? And what we provided was those bridge funds, in which we give the fund, and during this time, 1 or 2 years, we prepare them to be able to assess the PRONAF credit line. And what we found is that for each real or each dollar that Connexus invested, we were able to leverage $5 from the credit line in Brazil. So what we're coming up now is like, okay, we did about 20 prototypes. How can we bring this to have hundreds of prototypes? So the idea now, we created a credit enablers, and the credit enablers will be a liaison between the cooperatives in Brazil, the associations in the Amazon, and the banks. We have currently a partnership with the BASA, which is the regional bank of Amazonia in Brazil, is a public bank, in which the bank and ourselves will train these credit enablers, and the credit enablers will receive bonuses, not only for firming contracts with the bank, but most importantly, for the repayment rates of those loans. So the success of these loans, and therefore the oversight of this credit enablers, it will be key to the success of this. In addition to that, what we are building now is an intelligence business platform. And this intelligence business platform is to connect electric commerce with community-based enterprises, buyers, and other ones that can do. I can get into the details. But I think it's important to conclude now by saying that Connexus can't do this by itself. So we rely on a huge network of partners. In particular, I just would like to highlight the platform of the Partners for the Amazon, PPA, in which we are an official member of that fosters private capital into these businesses. The Council of Robotapas, or Extractivism, the National Council of Robotapas Extractivism in Brazil, as well as Unicafes, which is the umbrella organization for family farmers in Brazil. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Marina. If you could post the websites of the National Council of Rubber Tappers and Unicafes, that'd be great.
Okay, sure.
I posted the PPA website. So Now I'd like to move on to Daniel Nepstad and the Earth Innovation Institute. Daniel's work is at a global level, and it's at a government level and at a business to business level. It is not easy to start a business and operate in the Amazon. There's so many licenses that you need to get started. Daniel's analyzed the challenge. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jonah, and wonderful to be part of this amazing panel. I'm learning a lot. Yeah, I just want to come back initially. Well, Earth Innovation Institute is 10 years old. We're 35 people supporting multi-stakeholder consensus-based processes in 17 jurisdictions in the tropics around the world, with a focus on Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Indonesia. And really loved Inata's comments about consensus and consent. But I think just a quick comment on the fire situation today, which is, I think, a global challenge. Fire and forest fire is the way that climate change will reach many people around the world. And in Brazil, what we're seeing is an Amazon forest dieback, where the best solution is to engage landholders, communities. They are the ones who need to detect and put these fires out. And we need to frame that in a larger Amazon challenge, which Jonah's initiative, I think, addresses very well. We have to slow and reverse deforestation very quickly. The Amazon is an awful place to do business. Brazil is 109 on the Ease of Doing Business Index. Amazon is the worst place in Brazil, the hardest place. When legal compliance is not very feasible nor rewarding, that really tilts the whole playing field towards illegal operators. And that's the situation we have today. And I think the problem is we tend to put that blame on producers when there's a lot of important allies there who want to comply with the law, and they can't. There's obstacles. The CAR, the Environmental Registry, has been a mandate for 8 years. In Mato Grosso, there's a backup of 93,000 cars waiting to be validated. In other words, it's not happening. And if I'm a farmer in Brazil and I have a hectare of forest on my land, that'll give my property about $400 worth of value in the market. Once it's cleared, it's worth $1,000 more. To the global economy, through climate change damages, it's worth $55,000. And that, for me, is one of the world's most grotesque market failures, where a simple value of $1,000 loses the global economy $50,000. Surely we can figure this out. What's missing, I think, is we're in a mentality of rewarding perfection instead of rewarding meaningful progress. We recently completed an assessment of 40 jurisdictions around the world. 2 of 40 had received meaningful, that is large-scale, climate finance. 2 out of 40, all of them made formal commitments to the forest issue. Farm sectors, the same thing. They're waiting for the upside, the benefit of embarking upon forest-friendly development and climate-friendly agricultural practices. I'll close just with a mention of, among these 17 jurisdictions we're supporting, Mato Grosso, of course, is one of the biggest. In negotiating its statewide strategy, Produce, Conserve, Include, the farm sector made it very clear they would join the strategy if the focus was on legal compliance and compensation for those who go beyond legal compliance. And frankly, that was 2015. The incentives didn't arrive. They don't really believe anymore in that agenda. We need to get them back to the table. They're critical allies in all of this. And what we're helping the government of Mato Grosso to do is go from 4 to 40 car validations per day to whittle away at that really long queue. Make sure that once you're in the validated car, that there's a system of incentives waiting to support you. There's a wonderful still incipient consultation process with 45 indigenous people through Fepuimshi in Mato Grosso. That is a cornerstone of this statewide strategy. Governor Mauro Mendes wants to sell carbon neutral commodities. He wants to be part of that initiative, and he wants to sell offsets. And these are two ways of connecting, hundreds here in California. There's 150 climate neutral companies. And if there were jurisdictional offsets, they would buy them. And there aren't today. And so I think we need to help these states get verified under the California Tropical Forest Standard, under the Art Trees Standard. But before that, we need to make sure that this huge interest in slowing tropical deforestation translates into flows of finance on the ground that has been missing. And there's a way to do that. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Daniel, can you give us one sentence about the Tropical Forest Champions?
Tropical Forest Champions is an initiative we started to basically meet jurisdictions where they are. So instead of rewarding jurisdictions once they reach, success, let's give them incentives along the way. One of the concepts of Tropical Forest Champions is we need to make aspiring jurisdictions into safe zones so companies can partner. 40 jurisdictions around the world, only 6 had formed formal partnerships with companies, even though there's hundreds of companies trying to address deforestation. So the basic idea is to support jurisdictions making meaningful progress from the bottom up, and Mato Grosso is one of those.
Great, thank you so much. So moving to a macro level, we had invited Vetis Vik of the Norwegian Initiative on Climate, the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative, NICFI, I got it wrong, but she fell ill last minute, and it was too last minute for the Norwegian government to find a replacement. She was going to talk to us about the Amazon Fund, which is the largest intergovernmental philanthropy making a difference in Brazil and the Amazon. It's nearly $1 billion. She was going to talk to us about the carbon market innovation strategy of the NICFI program and some of their investments. And she was going to talk to us about the And Green Fund. And so we're going to invite a couple of other people to speak about those. So first is, I'm going to post the link about carbon market and ecosystem service payment innovation, the strategy that we are exploring through the Amazon Investor Coalition. And then I'd like to invite Ruben Lubowski of the Environmental Defense Fund to introduce himself and to talk about the Emergent Finance Accelerator.
Thank you, Jonah.
Go for it, Ruben.
And I'm just going to share my screen for a second, if you can see that. Is that working?
Not yet.
There we go.
There we go.
Great. So thank you, Jonah. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to build on what Dan was talking about in terms of creating a market for jurisdictional scale, large scale programs that reduce deforestation, and talk about an initiative called Emergent that we at the Environmental Defense Fund have been working on in partnership with the government of Norway, the Rockefeller Foundation, and other partners. So just briefly, I'm Ruben Lubowski. I'm the Chief Natural Resource Economist and also an Associate Vice President leading the work on tropical deforestation at the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. We're a nonprofit that focuses on using market-based approaches to solve big global problems. And we've been working for decades on the problem of Amazon deforestation as one of the critical elements to solve the global climate problem, as well as provide many other benefits. Emergent is a strategy we've been working on to really catalyze a market for high quality credits as one essential piece of the puzzle to halt tropical deforestation. and in particular as a way to scale up private finance to support these efforts. And we think we are right now at a historic moment to be able to realize this vision. There's been a lot of public funding up till now to support capacity building and policy development, strategy development at the government level. There's also been a lot of progress at the international level and the technical level on developing what people call the RED Plus framework, reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. This started within the framework of the UN climate negotiations, and the idea is to create a framework to basically a pay for performance or results-based performance-based way to drive finance if countries are able to reduce their deforestation and associated emissions, they would get payments for performance. So there's been a lot of work creating the frameworks, and this was also enshrined in the Paris Agreement. And we also see a lot of progress on the market side, where there's much more growing interest in potentially paying for natural climate solutions in general, but specifically for tropical deforestation. And this is both on the side of the voluntary market, where companies and individuals are just voluntarily willing to pay for emission reductions, but also critically on the regulated and compliance market side, where companies have mandatory emission reductions and also countries have mandatory targets, or not mandatory, but policy targets under the Paris Agreement that are part of law, and there are policies associated with that. So particularly the international aviation sector, starting next year, all international flights have mandatory requirements to reduce their emissions, and there's a potential to use offsets from outside the sector to meet part of that obligation. California, as Dan mentioned, has a regulated carbon market, and they've indicated interest in using tropical forests as part of that, and they've put out a tropical forest standard. There's also been work on the standard development, particularly this art standard that provides a high quality, ready to go way to have a standardized system to verify performance and issue credits for jurisdictional performance. I just want to quickly highlight, what do we mean by jurisdictional performance? That's something that we think is really critical here for the environmental integrity and also the scale of impact. The idea is not issuing credits for standalone isolated projects, but crediting and driving finance for performance at a big scale of a whole jurisdiction. And we see this as critical to our vision of how you can create a rewards for standing forests that also reward all the actors within the jurisdiction. Not the indigenous people, as we were talking about earlier, but also the farmers. Everyone who's part of the landscape needs to be part of the solution. To help achieve this, we've created something called Emergent. So we see this as a critical piece of the puzzle that would provide a platform to drive, to basically aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and provide a guaranteed source of finance for jurisdictions that are meeting high quality standards. So Emergent works with public donors to provide a minimum price guarantee. So like right now, working with the government of Norway, that's guaranteed $10 a ton for these jurisdictional programs, and then to sell the credits to a wide range of companies that are interested in buying credits. And we've got a roundtable of more than 30 major companies now looking to buy these credits. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ruben. I have just posted a tiny URL link to the Norwegian International Climate and Forest Initiative. Next, I'd like to invite Alexander Rose to talk. He represents the German Corporation for International Cooperation, or GIZ, as it is sometimes known, or GIZ, depending on what accent you're using at the time. He's also going to talk about the Amazon Fund that the German government has been supporting alongside the Norwegian government. And he will especially focus on green market development and preparing things for investors. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jonah, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to take part in this panel and to speak to the larger crowd. My name is Alexander Rose. I'm a project manager at GIZ. As Jonah said, GIZ is a German organization for international technical cooperation in sustainable development. So GIZ has been in Brazil for over than 40 years, working together with the Brazilian government, implementing projects on sustainable development. And of course, the Amazon is one of our main targets and factors and pieces of interest. For the Amazon strategy, it's basically 3 pillars. I've been engaged very much in sustainable use of the rainforests, which means strengthening the same cooperatives, smallholders, indigenous people, and traditional communities that Marina already mentioned at Connexus by producing sustainably and strengthening value chains like the acai berry, the nuts, sustainable fish, so the people really from the forest, and support them by strengthening their product and market access. When I say market access, I basically mean the institutional market, enable them to sell to schools, hospitals, school feeding programs, and private markets. So we believe that the potential is huge in building up a bioeconomy, showing that the standing forest is worth more than the cut down forest, really. On the same item, we also support the Brazilian government in governance, meaning we're supporting the CAR registry, the Environmental Governance Registry, which Daniel already mentioned, and the Terra Legal, which is basically the land titlement. As many of you know, or maybe some viewers don't, most land in the Amazon in Brazil, in fact, doesn't have land titles, which makes it really difficult, which makes it easy for land grabbing and embezzlement, and makes it really, really hard for the authorities to control the land. If you don't know who's the owner, it's very hard to find somebody or punish somebody. So we have been supporting the Brazilian governments in this part with CAR and land use. Then I would like to mention the KfW. Like GIZ is the technical cooperation, like we are implementing technical projects on the ground, while KfW, the German Development Bank, is the financial cooperation. And we're working hand in hand, and KfW basically follows the same 3 lines. KfW finances result-based payments on projects such as RED+, RED for Early Movers, in Acre and Mato Grosso for a couple of years already. Amazon Fund programs and projects as well. The second pillar is consolidation of protected areas. Make sure the protected areas and parks really work. They continue protected areas. They have the right management. And the last one is the environmental governance, basically support of CAR, the governmental environmental registry. The third initiative we have is the International Climate Initiative, ICI, which belongs to the German Ministry of the Environment, and it focuses mainly on climate change adaptation projects, diversity preservation, and mitigation. There's a call for proposals, which is global, and there's also a country-specific call for Brazil as well. One more thing to sustainable use of the forest, while we are supporting and helping basically smallholders, indigenous communities, land or riverbank communities, we also try to stimulate the consumer side, working on sustainable consumption with incentivizing people to focus, where is the product really coming from? Is there a traceability mechanism? Is there a certification? Farmers can get a higher value for the product if there are certifications and traceability mechanisms working. So I think some of the responsibility is with us as consumers as well in the big cities, in trying really, what kind of product am I buying? Who is selling it? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from deforestation, or really does it come from non-deforestation or from sustainable supply chains? Time is short. I would like to say a few words about the Amazon Fund. As you mentioned, Jonah, the Amazon Fund is the biggest philanthropic mechanism combating deforestation in Brazil. Last year we celebrated 10 years of the Amazon Fund. It is managed by Brazil's development bank BNDES, and the investors, the biggest investor is Norway. It's about 90% of the funds, and then the German government and the oil company Petrobras are the other investors. The fund has already invested 103 projects and benefited about 200,000 people in the Amazon with different approaches. There were patent application, capacity building for smallholders, social biodiversity value chain strengthening, land use planning, support of IBAMA. IBAMA is the Brazilian agency for land control, and it's also the agency that punishes land grabbers or people who don't, or property owners who don't comply with the forest code. Recovery of degraded areas and agroforestry systems are just some examples. So it's a lot of projects. It's a big fund. There's about $1.3 billion in it. $520 million have already been spent on the project. And now there's some, let's say, some discussion on the next steps of the fund and the investment line it should go on. I think I will stop here. The time is already up, and I'm available for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Alexander. I have just posted a couple of new links. One is about the And Green Fund, which the Norwegian government has also invested in. It's a fund looking to make deforestation-free commodities economically viable, to prove that you can have expansion in production without deforestation. And I've also posted a link to some of the Amazon Investor Coalition's strategy for investor engagement. I'd like to close us with Walter sharing a little bit more about Initiative 20 by 20 and organizing investors. Walter, you're on with us?
Yes. Let me share the screen again, if I can manage this.
And while we're waiting for Walter, we're about to come into questions, so people please put them in the Q&A area or the chat area.
Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so we left it here. This is the financial architecture of 2020. There are 23 impact funds and other funds linked to the initiative. Risk capital, we've seen, is not the worst problem. There is capital to invest in restoration and reforestation in the Amazon basin. And these are the structures that have been built in the platform to support the deployment of the risk capital. Investment roundtables, investment accelerator. We don't have time to go into details, but these are the structures in support of project identification and development. There is a partial risk guarantee that reduces the first losses and therefore the risk or the perception risk for investments, and there is a working capital tool. Now, I did mention impact investors. Impact investors make up 90% of the capital that is associated to the initiative. Impact investment, just to make sure that we are on the same framework, are investors that consider not only a financial return, but equally important, an environmental and social return. So this is not the typical investor, investment house, or Goldman Sachs. I'm not saying anything wrong about Goldman Sachs, but this is a different type of approach. Now, I did tell you that there are 195 projects on 25 million hectares, and I want to give you details on 3 examples to illustrate that this is not a blah, blah platform, but it's based on a reality on the ground. And the first project that I want to show you is the panel on the left, is the Sierra del Divisor. Was established a year and a half ago. It's a new permanent conservation area supported by the Andes Amazon Fund. Not only they paid for all the studies, the legal structure, but also the social and indigenous surveys, the baselines for forestry and biodiversity, but they are also supporting long-term the support for the governance and monitoring of this wonderful area. 1.3 million hectares in a new permanent conservation area in Peru, in the border with Brazil. The second example, different approach, is a project by INOCAS supported by Altilia. Altilia is the largest impact fund associated to Initiative 2020. Now, this is a plantation with macaúba palm and A. aculeata, which is a native palm in Brazil, and it produces an oil that is similar, better in quality and better in yield than African palm oil. As you know, African palm oil is one of the key drivers. African palm is one of the key drivers of deforestation in the Amazon. And we believe that the production of macaúba palm oil, which grows in semi-arid regions. So this is a very important feature. We are not, this project is not planting the macaúba palm in the Amazon, but is expected to have a large impact on one of the key drivers of deforestation in the Amazon. We believe that this project has substantial potential. They have already planted 3,000 hectares. And with the help of Initiative 2020 and some modest resources that we have, an expansion to 50,000 hectares with bringing the investment from Altilia and other funds is undergoing. The third project, different approach by Symbiosis Investimentos, is also an investor in Brazil, an impact investor in Brazil. They have already 5,000 hectares. We are supporting likewise their expansion to 50,000 hectares. And the idea here is to develop plantations with valuable timber species so that the illegal logging drivers and the drivers for seeking thinning of the forest by extracting the most valuable trees is diminished. So they are planting very valuable species like jacaranda and parajou, and they are doing it with already an investment of 5,000 hectares, but we are supporting bringing capital, risk capital, as well as paying for the pre-investment studies to increase it to 50,000 hectares.
1 minute, Walter.
There are 1 minute more. There are 195 projects, but much more needs to be done. So the environment ministers at COP 25 in December 19 in Madrid declare the Madrid Declaration on Landscape Restoration, scaling up the efforts of Initiative 2020 to 50 million hectares by 2030 and the inclusion of 30 million hectares in 2030 NDCs. Thank you, Jonah. Much more details are available. There are 195 projects in the database. If you're interested, let me know and I will provide information. Thank you, Jonah.
Great. Thank you so much, Walter. It is now time for questions. We already have our first one. I'm going to ask it of the panel. It's from Beto Borges. I'm going to read it and then I'm going to click the answer live question. This is it. And this is for any of you panelists. Jurisdiction level policies and investments are key, but what are the assurances that governments will remain committed to agreements and carry out command, control, incentives to sustainable development and benefit sharing to indigenous and other local communities when political transition comes about, the nature of governments that cannot be avoided? By Beto Borges from Forest Trends. Any takers?
Yeah, I'll respond to that. I think the example of Mato Grosso is fascinating, where 3 years ago there was a single indigenous leader represented in the state climate change forum. And today it's reversed. All 45 indigenous peoples of Mato Grosso are part of the consultation that's created the state program that now has about 10 million euros behind it through the German UK REM contract that Alexander mentioned. And that's, I think it's just, this is a choice of indigenous people to participate in these strategies. And I think they are the ultimate deciders of whether or not it's good for them or not. But you know, it's embedded in the California Tropical Forest Standard, the guiding principles developed with deep support from indigenous people. And yeah, there's no guarantees, but I think they want to do it.
In the interest of time, just to move through these, thank you for that, Daniel. Were there any other panelists? I think we just have time for one more to respond, or we can go ahead and move to the next question. Go for it, Ruben.
I was just going to say that I think it's a great question. There's no guarantee, obviously, but I think, you know, delivering large-scale change is not easy, and there can be political changes. But I think this speaks to some of the benefits of doing things at a jurisdictional scale, that if you can achieve these large-scale changes, you create certain structures that then are harder to reverse later, like we've heard with the you know, court cases defending the indigenous rights. I mean, you can try to reverse these things, but once you've put them in place, you create some structures and stakeholders that that can fight back and resist these changes.
Next up, we have a question from, it looks like the question was just removed. Sorry about that. So here's a question from Jody Weiss. She's wondering about all the efforts to forgive debt that Brazil and other nations owe China and other lenders as it relates to the Amazon. Would anybody like to take that one? I know that this has been a particularly big issue in Ecuador. There's a coalition of organizations and indigenous nations working on it. The Pachamama Alliance being one of them. There's a $20 billion oil field under several indigenous nations, and China has a big debt with Ecuador, and many people in the world want China to forgive that debt. I recommend looking at the website of the Pachamama Alliance to find answers. Does any, I'm going to, go
at the risk of talking too much, I'll just chime in quickly, and that is, you know, China and Brazil are incredibly interdependent, and China now by far the biggest buyer of soybeans, and Brazil the biggest supplier, especially with the Trump-China trade wars. And in that relationship and those negotiations, China is already voicing concern about the Amazon fires. I heard that from Marina Teresa Cristina, the Minister of Agriculture. There's concern in Brazil that market will be weakened. There's a need to get infrastructure investments. China is interested, for example, in Ferrogrão, which could be a good project or it could not be, getting Mato Grosso soy up to the Amazon ports. And so that's a really good question. And I think there's room for actually a lot of creativity in these negotiated trade relationships between Brazil and China that are underway right now.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Moving into the next question from Ayodele Wak-Williams. How can the private sector access these funds or partnerships in agriculture, fishing, shelter, and other priority sectors? Sierra Leone of Western Africa is open for partnerships from the private sector. Can it be done through its Chamber of Commerce, Industry, and Culture? Anybody want to take that one? Daniel, you've had a lot of partnership with governments as part of the Earth Innovation Institute. Give it your best shot.
Yeah, and I think no businesses want to do business with governments. You know, we hear that time and time again. And what I think the important message here is that there are public-private partnerships established to facilitate those deals. You know, the Company for Developing Ecosystem Services in Acre, CDSA, they are the first out of the gates. Something similar is under development in Mato Grosso. There's the PCI Institute, which is a non-governmental organization that can help facilitate deals with the broader PCI strategy. EDF has been very involved with that. So I think there's a lot of room. And by the way, this is a side of the current federal government of Brazil. They are all about, you know, opening Brazil to private partnerships, you know, and there's other, of course, concerns about their position, but they've opened up to offsets, you know, private offset, voluntary offset market deals are now free to go in Brazil. So, and this modernization agenda, streamlining the bureaucracy that has impeded deals, you know, segurança jurídica, legal security is one of the biggest limitations to deal making in the Amazon region, and that there's some political will to address that.
Thank you. This next question is from Amy Kokenauer. Tusha, I think this one is for you. What are the biggest barriers to securing the land and resource rights of indigenous and community lands in the Amazon to ensure equitable and inclusive investment?
I'm guessing that the main point is that we have the situation of lands that are already demarcated, so they are recognized by the state, and in this case, these are the most preserved lands in Amazonia right now. And what we're seeing today is that there are several attacks on the way that these communities want to live in each territory according to their own principles. So many legislation are being attacked and trying to change so that different ways extractivists initiatives could be put to work inside those territories. So I'm guessing that the dialogue should be, we should seek to establish a dialogue more coming in terms with what each community wants for itself and wants for their territories. This is something that we have a great difficulty to doing currently, because our ways the way that each community wants to live and wants to live in the future in those territories are not well recognized as a possibility. You see, land is totally being seen and regarded as a way of production, and not as something that communicates different ways of being and different existence, such as indigenous people and all the other beings that are in those lands. So I'm guessing that the first step to do this is obviously to establish ways to communicate with indigenous communities about the ways they want to be in the future and how they want to live in those lands, and take them seriously.
Thank you, Tusha. Here's another question for you from Lori. How can indigenous peoples defending territories and resources restore governance of economic development and avoid financial economic governance of governments, including our own indigenous governments?
Just one second, Jonah. Let me see if I can read it. Well, yeah, each community, as I said before, each community is trying to set goals. Set goals about how to live in those territories. So the first thing that if we are discussing about self-determination and recognize different ways in dealing and handling earth, land, and territories, the first thing that it is still a major obstacle for indigenous people to be able to govern themselves, if that's the term, is that land rights must be considered. This is still the main struggle that indigenous movement has in Brazil, land rights. There are many indigenous communities that are still struggling to have recognize the rights to land, to their traditional lands. And we can only discuss how can we advance in this discussion that Lori asked. Once the first step is always to demarcate indigenous land. This is the Portuguese term, demarcate, and to recognize these rights. So once the land is recognized, each community has its own way, nothing new, but traditional ways to manage sustainability in a sustainable way, this land. I'm guessing that, yeah.
Thank you. So our next question is from Danielle Sabara from Instituto Beraca, and this may have been directed to Walter, who had to leave for another call, but I'll ask him, maybe someone else knows the answer. It's about the Inocas plantation of Macaúba palms. He wants to know, is it based in Minas Gerais state or in the Amazon region? Does anybody know the answer to that one? I do know that there's some Macaúba plantations in or near the Amazon. Okay, we'll move to the next question. Daniel, I'll get an answer to that question for you from Walter. This is from Daniel Roth. Even progressive global financing often requires a drive towards standardization and dependence on materialistic measures like carbon or dollars. How do we build truly reciprocal partnerships with the broad cultural diversity and spiritual worldviews of the indigenous community currently stewarding large areas of the Amazon without diminishing their power? This one's for everybody. Tusha, feel free to take a first stab. Or Alex, would you like to speak?
Daniel, this is, I feel like you have just touched the core question, I mean, for the discussion, because experience has showed us that as indigenous people, that we can engage in this transactions and this kind of innovative ways in which this economy tries to relate to land and to what is in those territories in the most sustainable ways, or trying to be inclusive with indigenous perspectives on management and something. But it never goes to the next step, you know. It never really takes takes to consideration indigenous perspectives and all the other perspectives that composes a territory. That things are not simply the trees and what composes indigenous cosmos and that lives in makes the territory differently for each community, is something that white people just doesn't seem to understand or doesn't want to understand. And when you put that in market, it seems like this is the place where we have much difficult to advance and to move forward. So I feel like it's a very unanswered question, because even when we as indigenous try to establish different kinds of relations with different actors, you see, you have governors, you have farmers, you have miners, and you have people that maybe try to do something differently. When it comes to truly grasp and understand what we say that a territory is made of, there's always some sort of misunderstandings and failure to communication that always leaves indigenous people in the worst situation in this communication, in this relation.
Any other responses to the question?
Maybe I can complement. Of course, there's a trend for standardization. I've been in touch with some impact investors, and regarding the Amazon scenario, I believe both sides have to learn and maybe adjust a little bit. I noticed that most impact investors have a very long line of requirements and yeah, requirements basically and criteria. Business peoples or small cooperatives cannot really comply with these criteria. So maybe the investors need to adjust a little bit in terms of criteria. Maybe on the other hand, smallholders, cooperatives, indigenous people need to adjust. And I believe the best chance here is always a multi-stakeholder partnership. Even indigenous communities have their representations in their organizations and associations. Then there are state agencies. So I believe to build this reciprocal partnerships, it is really important to draw in a multi-stakeholder platform to make sure it works well, really.
Great, thank you. Tusha, someone has asked in the chat if someone has your Twitter handle. Maybe you want to post your Facebook page or your Twitter page in the chat. The next question is from John Bruno. He asks, is anyone focusing on sustainable tourism? I'm aware of some impact investors are. I believe that Rainforest Ventures is an ecotourism shop out of Peru that has had some success. Would others like to respond?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we as Connexus, through our fund, we are investing, for example, in an opportunity in Brazil that is a small company called Amazônia Ensina, or Amazonia Learns or Teaches, and which is a small company working with community-based tourism in the Rio Negro area. Because what we think it's very important too is there is a huge, vast opportunities in tourism, and I think in Brazil and in the Amazon, and how to build a tourism opportunity that actually helps and leverages the community-based resources and give you a truly understand of what is to live in the Amazon and be in the Amazon. So that's a little bit of what Amazônia Ensina is doing. And we are very happy with that. And we hope, as a part of the platform for Amazon partners, there is a whole stream of trying to improve and scale up opportunities like this.
Any other
responses? Marina, GIZ is also trying to strengthen the sustainable value lines of tourism or ecotourism, as we consider this to be part of a larger bioeconomy. The potential of the Amazon is huge. In fact, the potential of Brazil is huge, but the entire country gets less visitors than Uruguay next door, for example. So the numbers are really small for the entire country. Amazon is a great place to visit. And I think this is one part in terms of sustainable use of the forest we should be focusing on over the next years. Plenty of room to grow.
I totally agree.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the next question. This is from Marco Vanderi, and I just want to say that this session was originally supposed to end at 1:20, but we intentionally built in a buffer of 10 minutes to be able to go to the half of the hour. So the room will stay open, and I believe that most of the presenters can stay on, and we might actually be able to get to the end of our questions. So this next question is, besides the land rights for communities, how can we accelerate, sorry, my screen just changed. How can we accelerate the support to community-owned sustainable development enterprises and accelerate innovative mechanisms for market access, as well as putting a value on the carbon stocks in their forests? Any takers?
Yeah, I'd like to address that. So what we're experiencing in Connexus now that our fund is being open to impact investors and other ones is truly, as Alexander was saying, the investors are looking to one side. They want carbon, or they want some social and impact coming out of their investments. And it's interesting because since we are working with cooperatives and communities, and not necessarily with private landowners, we are actually developing a monitoring program with support from Arimax Foundation in Brazil, in collaboration with Terras Up, which is a spin-off from the Amazon Institute, in which we are creating a methodology on how actually you can be monitoring carbon stocks and carbon conservation, and also how can we be creating a set of indicators of social impact as well. So we are finalizing some of these assessments now and starting to prototype, because it's a different way in which you can be assessing the land and the impact that this community-based enterprises have on the landscape. So that's one of the things we want to be heavily investing in this year and next year going forward.
The next question, is there a role for the rights of nature framework for our financial and investment strategies? I know that the rights of nature has been written into the Constitution of Ecuador, maybe Bolivia as well. Any responses? I can give a response, which is that in Ecuador, even though it's written into the Constitution, things are not always implemented, because there is competing language in the Ecuadorian Constitution giving rights to businesses. So even though you may have an ideal framework for rights of nature within the legislation of your country, you still need political will to push on things. It's a very big question. If none of the other panelists have a response, I'll go ahead and go to the next question. Okay, is there a collaboration among South American governments who share the Amazon forests that are working together to protect it? Are indigenous communities among different countries in the Amazon working together to find strength in their purpose? So we could talk about COICA, and we can talk about the Leticia Pact. Anybody want to, and the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization? Would anybody like to take those? Go for it.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Just, I meant to mention the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force earlier. All of the Brazilian states are members. All of the Peruvian Amazon is a member. Pastaza, Ecuador, and Caquetá, Colombia. And so we've got more than 80% of the Amazon in those participating subnational governments, all focus on forest and climate. And beginning in 2014, indigenous leaders started to participate in those meetings, and that culminated in 2018 in the guiding principles for collaboration between indigenous peoples and subnational governments that I mentioned as part of the Tropical Forest Standard, and is being implemented through national committees. So there's a Brazilian committee, and there's a Peruvian committee, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very active collaboration, and that very few people know about.
Any other responses? I'm going to go ahead and post the link for the coordination of indigenous organizations in the Amazon Basin. Tusha, do you want to talk about the indigenous collaboration across the region? Okay, we'll come back to you. So the president of Colombia convened a group of his peers, presidents of other Amazon countries, last September in Colombia to set some new agreements together about cooperation in the region to prevent deforestation. It's called the Leticia Pact. I will search for it and post it here. There's also an organization that's several decades old called the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which is based in Brasilia. And I'll search for it and post its link here as well. There's a lot of intergovernmental collaboration. There's also even a group that was started in California. Daniel may have mentioned it when I was researching other links, the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force. Oh, I see, it's already posted. Okay, going to the next question. This is from Margarita Mora. What are the recommendations from Felipe Cruz Tusha on how organizations working in the Amazon should fully involve indigenous peoples in decision-making?
I feel like the first thing to be considered is to acknowledge and recognize indigenous autonomous political organization. You see, a PIB is a national level of association, but it puts together a great number of other associations, local and regional. So I'm guessing that the first thing is to establish relationships and partnership with those associations, local indigenous associations and organizations, recognizing their ways in defining their priorities and what is development to them, which is a question that should be the departure point. That these partnerships and with those organizations that are willing to work with indigenous people, it can only go forward if it listen to indigenous people, who are the ones that were there first in those places now, and also know best what they want for the future. So I'm guessing that to acknowledge and to recognize indigenous organization, leadership, autonomy, and the whole idea that decisions should be made together and not simply informed to indigenous people.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So in closing, I'd like to give everybody, all the panelists, a minute to make their final recommendations. And I'm going to post a couple of links to request some social media love from the community to help raise awareness about the Amazon Investor Coalition. Alex, would you like to start with closing remarks?
Which Alex?
Okay.
Oh. Alexandre Mansour, why don't you start?
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to know that so many people are joining us to fight the destruction of Amazon and try to create sustainable development there. My recommendation is that the problem is very complex. We should focus on the main drives of deforestation, not to lose energy. And we can move some small parts to have greater impact if you understand the main reasons for deforestation in the region. That's why we choose to tackle deforestation on public lands caused by land grabbing, because this is the low-hanging fruit. Thank you so much.
Great, let's move to the other Alexander Rose.
Okay, thanks, Jonah. Thanks again for having me. Well, the Amazon is spectacular. The quantity and quality of fruits and products the Amazon provides is really incredibly large, and this is the base for a bioeconomy. I think we should be focusing on not only for foodstuff, but for pharmaceuticals, for cosmetics. And in terms of us consumers in the big cities, I think we can do our part and really require certifications, require sustainable supply chain, make sure in our decision of purchasing, what are we purchasing really, where is it coming from? So let's support the sustainable use and sustainable production of the Amazon. This is a good way to contribute, keeping this forest standing. Thanks, Jonah.
Great, thank you. Marina.
Well, I also want to join all the thanks that you're receiving for organizing this forum, and also for all the efforts that you put into creating this forum of the Amazon investors, which hopefully will really help us to boost an economy in the Amazon. And I just would like to touch on something that Mansour said. The Amazon is a very complex issue. It's very multifaceted. But what I truly believe, or we in Connexus, we truly believe, is that you can do a lot of things on working on drivers of deforestation or rule of law and transparency of agribusinesses, supply chains. This is all very important. But if you really want to build an inclusive economy for the forest, you have to be working with smallholders and indigenous communities. That's the only way we're going to create an economy that's not favoring the big businesses in Brazil. They're not favoring external agents, but is really truly a development for the Amazon and for the people who live in the Amazon. Thank you.
Daniel.
Jonah, thanks so much for organizing a great session. I am leaving it inspired and invigorated, and great questions from the full audience. And I just want to close, I guess, saying 2004 to 2012, Brazil reduced deforestation 77%. But it was all command and control and a lot of law enforcement, a lot of punishment without the carrots. And I feel like we're moving into a phase of carrots. We had some great examples of that. I love the community enterprise examples that Maite talked about. Alexandre, your initiative, and it seems like all of the elements are there to have both the laws being implemented and the positive incentives, including the way we talk about different actors in the Amazon that could really take this to scale. Thank you so much.
Tusha.
Well, I just want to thank you for the opportunity here to participate with you. Thank you, Jonah, and thank you everyone for the questions. I'm going to write down my email because I don't have the pages that you asked. I don't have Twitter or anything, so I might share my email. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Great. And Ruben.
Thanks, Jonah. Thanks, everyone. I'm also inspired. I think my just two thoughts is that we have a big opportunity and need to think big in terms of what's possible and what's needed, and that we need all the tools on the table, and including engaging markets and private finance, and that these jurisdictional approaches, large-scale approaches to crediting, offer a way that can hopefully align these markets with the communities, and especially create space that empowers the indigenous communities, and also creates a need to engage the smallholders to deliver the results at scale, because without their involvement, that's not going to happen. So this emphasis on performance at scale, and also some of these standards that also enshrine the need to engage indigenous and local communities can be a way to make that happen. So thank you.
So in conclusion, my recommendation for everybody is learn, engage, enroll, get involved. There are so many links here for you. I can't believe how many links we have in this call, everybody. There's no excuse. Dive in, amazoninvestor.org, go there, sign up for the newsletter, check out that article on Manga Bay, check out that Amazon Studies article there. It's incredibly long, took months to put together. Post everything you want in that AIC notes tiny URL link there. That's the document. I'm gonna post the entire chat from there, and read every single one of those books and watch every single one of those films on the Amazon, and then you're gonna be ready to take on the challenge along with the rest of us. Thank you everybody for an extraordinary session. I'm most grateful. And we hope that Vedisvik from Norway heals and comes back from the hospital and says, oh my God, I can't believe it, and gets involved in a big way. Thanks, everybody.